Hello and welcome to Economic Forum. My name is Tawanda Gutlanda. This week our focus is on procurement and the supply value chain in Zimbabwe. We have invited in the studio Mr. PRESTON, who is the chair of the Zimbabwe chapter of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, CIPS. Sir, thank you so much for coming through to the program.
Thank you very much, Tawanda, and thank you very much for the invite.
It seems that procurement and supply chain has evolved over the years, both at a private sector perspective as well as a public sector perspective. Maybe if you can just walk us through, as an introduction, how we've grown in terms of the procurement and supply value chain.
Thank you very much. As we can see, procurement or supply chain management, as you can call it, have evolved from the transactional buying. You know, traditionally, we used to have a lot of buyers just doing the transactional over-the-shop, over-the-counter purchases. But now, as you can see, procurement have grown to a strategic function, which is more of an advisory, providing advisory service to the organization as internal stakeholders, as well as enabling organization to build their risk profiles as far as the supply chain is involved. So as a result, we no longer have that buyer who just go to ask for quotations, but we are also looking at an advisor to the organization in terms of the strategic direction that the organization can take.
Obviously, that is supported by knowledge of the industry. You are one of just but 8 fellows of the professional body, but looking at the profession itself, do we have enough human capital in that field?
Of late, we have improved. I can say we have improved because when you look at Zimbabwe as a country, I think traditionally you know that procurement and supply chain was offered mainly at polytechnical colleges. Then it involved when universities introduced the degree qualifications, universities like Chinhoyi, Bindura, Lupani, and also private universities like the women's universities. Now we also have the masters. But when you look maybe 10 years back the line, procurement was mainly offered as a qualification, mostly in the polytechnical colleges, and you see that most of the guys who did their masters back then had to go outside of the country to do the qualifications. So at the moment, I think as we stand as a nation, we are privileged that most or majority of universities, more than 6 universities now, are offering this qualification, which is a good indication towards the good direction.
You say it is a key function of strategic management and also offering the advisory side of doing business. Take us through that notion, because a lot still think that maybe procurement should be dwelling under admin or human resources for that matter.
When you look at procurement or the various stages that we go through in the procurement cycle, you look at the needs identification, where organizations sit down, review their budgets vis-a-vis what they want in what we can call a shopping list. So the role of procurement now is to identify the strategies to say, once the organization comes up with their shopping list vis-a-vis their budgets, you identify the sources of those strategic services, of those inputs, be it raw materials, be it goods or services. You start to identify, you design your sourcing strategy, where then you are saying, are you going to do local sourcing, international sourcing, regional sourcing? So all this in the back end, we are saying the procurement professional should be highly knowledgeable to see or to be able to share knowledge once they come up with a procurement plan, to be able to advise the organization to say, looking at our wish list, looking at our budget, this is the basic strategy that we should employ as an organization. So this is where now information comes handy, the global network comes handy, where we are saying the procurement professional is no longer just a localized person, but he should be an all-rounder who is able to articulate information written in form of a wish list vis-a-vis the global trends and the sources that are available.
In terms of benchmarking, where do we stand as a country when we look at supply chain management and the professionals thereof?
We still lag behind, but I just want to applaud that there have been some improvement, looking from the government perspective as well, where they also introduced the Procurement Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe. You know, it's one step in the right direction when the government recognizes the need for procurement to be able to view procurement as a pillar in the development of the country, which need a regulatory authority or a regulatory body to be in place. Then you also look at the introduction by even universities. Of late, we have University of Zimbabwe adding on procurement as part of their curriculum. It shows that at least the leadership have seen the important role that procurement can play within the economy. Hence, they are also trying to see how best they can capacitate individuals and professionals within the sector itself.
One reputation that the profession carries is that it has now become the most sought after profession, given the propensity to manipulate figures and the like. How have you managed to actually turn that sort of perception where it's open sesame when it comes to corruption, greasing of palms, and all that in the profession?
You know, it's unfortunate. It's one of those notions that everyone believes in. You know, everyone wants to be in procurement, sometimes because of the wrong reasons. They want to be in procurement because of the interaction with suppliers, you know, the issues of corruption coming up. But one thing that we have also realized is that as people are developing, the most important aspect is to consider ethical training in organizations. As the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, we have what we call the annual procurement ethical test, where we are encouraging our members to go through an ethical training and an ethical, where they are also signing on ethical statements to say we abide to the ethics of the profession. Because one thing, it's very easy to ruin your reputation as a procurement professional if you do not abide to these ethical standards. So what we are always encouraging our members and fellow professionals and anyone else within the profession is to say, let's abide to the ethical standards. Some may wonder how best we can, especially with professional bodies. The good thing when you join a professional body, such as the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, CIPS, there's always a code of ethics that we abide. We subscribe and we pledge to abide to.
Let's talk more about ethics and, of course, the roles that are played within the profession. Join us after the break as we continue our discussion on procurement and supply chain management. Join us then. Welcome back. We are focusing on procurement and supply chain management on the program, and we have Mr. PRESTON HWENA. Now, you were talking about ethics, and there is a test that you speak about as a professional body, but it looks like most organizations always use moral suasion as opposed to actually coming up with punitive action. I want you to understand your assessment of procurement and those that have breached some of those ethical practices which you do encourage professionals to abide by.
When you look at the sources of corruption, mainly, we are looking at buyers or individuals within the organization manipulating the systems or taking advantage of the loopholes that exist within those systems in order to push their own agenda or for personal gain. So what we are saying is that the issue of ethics, besides being professional bodies pushing for ethical conduct and ethical standards within buyers, we are also saying organizations themselves also needs to have ethical standards and code of conducts as basis of practice within their organization, where, for example, procurement professionals are made to sign declaration of conflict of interest annually. On annual basis, let them renew those that I do not have any conflict of interest and I'll perform my duties in accordance to the organization's objective. Then once you are within the organization, we also need instruments that support ethical conduct. Let's have instrument as an organization like the control frameworks within the organization, because you find out one key source where ethical conduct come into place is that lack of control or no segregation of duties, where you find out the person who signs off the order is the one who receives and the one who decides on his own or on themselves. So that on its own open loopholes. So we are saying let's have segregation of duties. And in addition to the segregation of duties, let organization also inform their suppliers. Whenever, as an organization, you have your suppliers, possibly your list of suppliers, have them also sign the ethic code of conduct for the organization, where you can also have, because it takes two to tango between the buyer and also the suppliers. So suppliers at times, they drive the corruption. Buyers at times drive the corruption. But when we have instruments in place where you are also saying, as our suppliers, please sign off a code of conduct that you are not going to entice our buyers or to give bribe to our buyers. And buyers, on the other hand, they also have to sign. And even anyone within the organization, anyone with management responsibility, will have to sign off. Because some of these corrupt issues, you find, they also emanate from top management, where they also try to drive the procurement decision and procurement processes towards their own, maybe, entities, towards their own companies.
That brings a very interesting perspective, the relationship between management or executives in the organization and the role of the procuring officer or manager, as it were. How safe are they? Because really we're talking about money here, and everyone is driven by the profit motive, as it were. How do professionals deal with such instances where they are having to have certain things imposed upon them?
I know it's always a difficult issue. As we have seen, maybe 70–80% of the stories coming out in the newspapers where management or one top manager forced the decision on procurement professionals. But now I think with the coming, when you look at the public procurement as per se, now we have PRAS, we have the Public Procurement and Public Disposal of Assets Act in place, where it also gives provisions to say, as buyers, ensure that every action, everything that you do is put in writing. You know, it really helps when a manager wants to push down their agenda. Just communicate to them, say, can I have this in writing? I know at times it's difficult because most of the buyers are also afraid of losing their jobs. But what we are saying is that as a professional, you rather be safe in terms of protecting your reputation and your professional ethics rather than to give in to that pressure.
But let's also look on the other hand. I mean, look, like you're saying, the buyer has vast networks. The buyer or the procuring manager has global knowledge. And as such, relationships do actually okay. What is wrong with coming up with a mechanism that accepts the fact, the reality that buyers do have a relationship with suppliers and they are likely to benefit in one form or the other? I mean, I've attended various forums on procurement, and one of the key terms used in other jurisdictions is known as the bashish, which is basically saying that we do acknowledge that you are a procuring manager and this is your bashish, this is your tribute or whatever you want to call it, in acknowledgement of the business and deals that are done.
First and foremost, you are doing this business on behalf of the company that has entrusted you with the responsibility. So for you to derive any personal gain out of that transaction, it's wrong. It's ethically wrong. So as a procurement professional, any benefit that is derived from that transaction should go towards the organization if we want to be fair enough. So what we are saying is that sometimes, because there have been that expectation from both the suppliers as well as from the buyers, which is wrong. So we are saying, let's try to reform, let's try to transform this industry, let's try to transform this profession for the best of our organizations. Because at the end, what we want to build is, if we're going to have any cost savings, any value for money derived from the procurement process, let it go to the organization. Let the organization enjoy. If the supplier wants to give us discount, yes, let it come and let it benefit the organization rather than to benefit me as an individual.
Join us in the third and final segment as we look at the way forward and also the negative impact of COVID-19 to the sector. Join us there. Welcome back. We are focusing on procurement and the supply chain management in Zimbabwe, and we have Mr. PRESTON from SIPS. Before we went to the break, you spoke about the transformation of public procurement, where you said we now have a procurement regulatory authority of Zimbabwe, which has superseded the state procurement body. What have been the major changes?
Generally, you see that the Procurement Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe is now the regulatory body, and procurement have been decentralized to procurement entities. When you look at various ministries operating and doing their own procurement rather than the state procurement body doing procurement for every parastatal or for every entity.
So what does it mean?
Now this means that the procurement entities are now responsible for the decisions that they make as far as the procurement decisions are done. And then you also see that the accounting officers, which is the highest level of decision making at each and of those public entities or procurement entities, now being responsible or being held accountable for the decisions that they make as far as procurement decisions are made.
Given that, that is obviously giving some form of autonomy within that particular organization. But let's take a look at national disasters when they strike. Take, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, it has had some form of effect to the supply chain management. In that case, is it done at a national scale, or still procuring entities have the autonomy to make procurement?
As you have seen, especially from the 2020 when the COVID disaster strikes, procurement entities have been doing their own procurements related to COVID at a different level. I know at some point Ministry of Health was coordinating, but the implementation of the actual processes were not per se coordinated by the ministry, but they were disseminated to various entities.
But what has been the impact of COVID-19 to the supply chain management?
Generally, when you look at COVID-19, it have actually destroyed supply chains. It have caused a lot of untold sufferings. Take, for example, supplies were hindered. Like, for example, when you look at Zimbabwe, where we rely mainly on imports of most of our products, we import from China, United States, South Africa. These were hard-hit areas by the COVID to such an extent that in most of these countries, they also passed legislation where they also restricted export of COVID supplies, PPEs, and the like. So you find out the market was seriously affected to such an extent that you would see a lot of fake products coming on the market, a lot of unestablished suppliers turning overnight to be PPE suppliers, which was one of the critical issues when it comes to public health itself. Because you now see, for example, one company is well known for construction, but overnight they wake up and say, we are now supplying masks, we are now supplying sanitizers, which was more of a health hazard because of the control measures that we normally expect, especially when you look at products to do with human health, products to do with human life. So we ended up seeing a lot of fake products on the market, unregulated, or products that does not have any quality standards or conformity to any quality standards. But because we were in a time of desperation, you find out a lot of entities ended up procuring such products. And you see that under normal circumstances, as organizations, we expect procurement to be done in accordance to policy guidelines, to be done in accordance to set down rules. But you know, because of emergence, everyone panics and some of those guidelines were disregarded.
Is it getting any better? We are now in the second wave, Brazil and other jurisdictions in the third wave. Is it getting any better?
Actually, at the moment, it's getting worse. When you look at 2020, at the onset of the pandemic, when the global lockdowns were pronounced, actually supply chain was more like, there was a time when supply chain was almost like standstill. But around July, August, things started to improve because a lot of manufacturers resumed operations because of easing down. Some of the local lockdowns were eased in various countries. But now with the second wave, where a lot of countries are also now pronouncing a second phase of lockdown, things might turn up for the worse. And you would see that supplies will continue to be dwindling on the market because there's a lot of competition at the moment with few suppliers or with few manufacturers at the moment. So even at global level, you see that one of the other areas where we are facing huge challenges is the shipment of commodities. You may find supplies in China, you may find supplies in Germany, but shipping them from there to Zimbabwe, it may take ages, which is also one other critical issue that this COVID pandemic have caused. So you see that even suppliers, those who have capacity to import, they may source the goods, but there are no airlines to bring the commodities to Zimbabwe.
But let's just, zoom in on the role of government when it comes to procurement, as well as understanding people rights, consumer rights, for example. What then becomes the relationship here between statutory bodies like the Standards Association of Zimbabwe, lobbyist groups like Consumer Council, and professional bodies that have to do with procurement, maybe like PRAS or even SIPs? What roles do they play?
When you look at procurement, as procurement professionals, we working on a mandate to satisfy the needs of our internal customers, where we are given a requisition with clear specifications. But now the problem comes when we have insufficient specifications. Take, for example, we have to procure issues to do with sanitizers. You see that when you go on the market, there are a lot of sanitizers on the market. But when you look at the specifications based on the recommendations by WHO, because remember, WHO is the motherboard when it comes to health issues, as well as the COVID products are concerned. So there are guidelines where each product have got minimum specification requirements, like 70% alcohol, the packaging, labeling, and so forth. So you find out procurement plays a critical role to advise the internal stakeholders where they see that these specifications are incomplete. You advise them to make full specifications which will bring the right product.
But who do you blame, let's say, in the retail sector, where masks are on sale, and now Zumbani has found its way onto the shelves, and there are really no specifications or directions to use, or even the packaging may be questionable. How do you deal with such kind of procurement issue?
As far as specifications, as product availability is concerned for the market, regulatory bodies such as the Standard Association of Zimbabwe, the Medicines Control Authority, as well as the government through the Ministry of Health, they have a role to play, because in most cases they are the ones providing permits, especially as far as imports is concerned. So this is where we are saying, let's have the mandatory requirements in terms of standards and certifications of these products before they are imported into the country. These are the regulatory bodies that look at the quality assurance aspect. Do these products conform to the requirements of the public health in terms of the ISO certification, the conformity requirements, as well as the declaration where the origin of some of these goods from the manufacturer's point of perspective, what sort of internationally recognized quality standards do these products conform to? once we have products that conforms to international quality standards, then we will not worry about health hazards and risk, especially when you look at items like gloves, masks, and other PPEs, where they are supposed to meet specific standards in order to protect the user, the health user who is going to put them on, as well as the patient who is going to be attended to, because they have to be foolproof in terms of transmission between the patient as well as the health workers who are going to be using these PPEs.
Preston, so little time, so much to talk about, but we hope we shall find some more time to explore other issues within the procurement and the supply chain management confinement.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you and also having to discuss these issues.
Our guest this week was Mr. PRESTON HWENA. He is the chair of the Zimbabwe chapter of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. We've come to the end of the program. Do join us again next time here on Economic Forum. On behalf of the team behind the scenes, it's pleasant viewing.